Well, let's get into it, I guess. So what can I do to be helpful for you today?
I received my Motus hand
Great.
last Thursday, and I've been doing sessions every day. And my hand does not have a lot of strength,
Okay.
so it tires very quickly. And I do appreciate the rest breaks built in.
hmm
But what is best practice for? I'm doing about 90 minutes right now. And what's the
Okay.
best practice? Is it okay to do 90 minutes in one session? Is it better to break it up into two or three?
Yeah, good question. So I think that in terms of best practices, it's going to be variable for each individual. And that's a non-answer answer, but let me try to make it personal for you. And what I like to do is I like to empower people to use the controls that the Motus hand has on it to accommodate their own sort of perceptions of fatigue and these sorts of things, right? Because what we want to do is we want to deliver a sufficiently challenging stimuli to induce a change in our brains, but it shouldn't be so hard that you are losing capacity over the course of a given session. So let me give you an example here, right? If let's say you start out and you're fresh and clean for day one and you have 40 degrees of movement, both directions, or 40 degree total movement, and we can record that. But what happens after a period of time, if you're doing more and more repetitions, that range of motion that you move in will shrink. And this is fairly clear on the data. I can even send you some examples of this. And in fact, we might even experience that when we do our sessions together. So what we want to do is we want to avoid that decrease as much as possible because we want you practicing in the sort of good available range of motion that you have, right? If we do have 40 degrees of movement, maybe with help, but you're only using the 10 degrees 30 minutes in, 90 minutes in, that's not great. So what I encourage people to do is one, we can kind of engineer some things to accommodate that. One, by making sure there's enough adequate rest breaks. But two, the really important thing is when you are recognizing that sort of sense of fatigue, pause the screen. I encourage people to use the pause button, right? To just tap the screen and give yourself a rest period, right? As little as 30 seconds to a minute can be sufficient to actually kind of recharge things. And this is just down
Okay,
to the fact that there are
excuse
sort of,
me if I interrupt
sure,
you for a moment. You've said
sure,
two words that are very pertinent to me:
sure.
perception and sense.
Yes, yes.
I have pretty significant sensory impairment
Okay,
and absolutely no proprioception.
okay,
So perception and sense, I don't have it. To
okay,
know, I have
sure.
to use the outside feedback. I like the blue bars that
Yes.
show progress, and those are very helpful for me, but it has to be that outside stimulus that lets me know that I'm tiring. I cannot tell.
Sure. So that's really good insight that you have that. I think it's really good that you know that that is a limiting factor for you. I think that sort of sense of awareness is important. And I encourage people to sort of do a little introspection to try to figure out what's the best sort of format for them. And so, yeah, we do have those sort of external indicators that could be helpful for that. And so I'd say when we start, I would encourage you to recognize when, like your normal tempo, if you will, right? Just imagine that we're walking normally. You and I are walking normally down the street, and you're going to, by nature of just knowing sort of the cycle of your steps, your cadence, these sorts of things, you're going to know what is the normal tempo that we would walk. And let's say that I was your ground truth and I just kept walking at that speed. And then you suddenly notice that you were falling behind, right? Imagine like that tempo is present and just be cognizant of that tempo. And whenever you kind of fall back on that, either it's becoming more challenging for you or takes a longer time to actually complete one of the repetitions, maybe that's one of your key indicators for taking that rest period. And the idea is, yeah, maybe some of those sensory systems are impaired, but over time, what you may be able to do is you may be able to recognize other components of your interoception as being key indicators of that fatigue. And this is kind of, it's, the word compensation has some baggage to it because it's usually thought of as being replacing something with maybe a system that's inadequate. But I'd say in the cases where we do have impaired sensations, we need to think of other systems that might compensate. And of course, the visuals, very helpful, but I would also encourage you not to just throw out all of the sensations that you're feeling. Maybe something completely different, right? Maybe it's a sense of effort. Maybe you feel like you're trying more, like, I guess, harder to actually complete the tasks. Or maybe it's something completely different that I haven't even verbalized to you. But I would encourage you to take stock of all those things that are kind of going on in your head as you are doing the rehab, and maybe developing your own pattern of a fatigue indicator. And that would be sort of a way you could kind of progress forward. But I think, yeah, let's rely on the visuals to start with because they're fairly clear and objective, but we can try to figure out a more internal loci for you, because hopefully probably you won't have to be using the Motus hand forever, and you're going to be needing to have some sort of internal model of your own capacities going on for your long life ahead. So I think that's something just a skill to practice as well.
Definitely.
Sure.